When people look at Katy Perry today, they see stadium tours, global hits, and a pop icon who helped define an era. But the beginning of her story looks nothing like the glitter and neon colors that would later define her brand. She was born Catherine Elizabeth Hudson on October 25th, 1984 in Santa Barbara. Her parents, Keith Hudson and Mary Hudson, were deeply religious Pentecostal pastors. Faith wasn't just part of the house, it was the structure of her entire childhood, and that structure came with strict boundaries. In Katy's home, most forms of pop culture were discouraged or completely banned. Secular music was considered inappropriate. The family listened mostly to gospel. Even simple things many kids took for granted, like certain TV shows or popular songs, were off-limits. For a child who would later become one of pop music's boldest personalities, this environment created a quiet but powerful internal conflict. Music, however, was always there. Her first stage wasn't a concert hall. It was Katy began singing in church services as a child. The congregation became her first audience, and gospel music became her first training ground. By her early teens, she was already taking voice lessons and learning how to perform. But something important happened when she discovered artists outside her family's musical world. Through friends and small glimpses of secular music, she encountered artists like Alanis Morissette, Freddie Mercury, and Queen. For the first time, she realized music could be theatrical, emotional, rebellious, even strange. And that realization would quietly reshape her ambition. At just 15 years old, Katy left traditional high school after earning her GED. She decided to pursue music seriously and moved to Nashville, hoping to build a career in Christian music. It seemed like the logical path. After all, it was the world she knew. In 2001, she released her first album under her birth name, Katy Hudson. The record was a Christian gospel album. It sold very few copies and received little attention. For many artists, that would have been the end. But failure became her first real teacher. Instead of giving up, Katy made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She would reinvent herself. She moved to Los Angeles, chasing a completely different sound. Pop and rock music that had nothing to do with the strict world she grew up in. That transition was not smooth. She signed record deals that collapsed. Albums were recorded, but never released. Labels dropped her repeatedly. At one point, she was so broke, she was living in borrowed apartments, sleeping on couches while trying to keep writing music. Years passed. Imagine believing you're meant for something bigger, while the world keeps telling you no. Yet during those difficult years, Katy was developing something more valuable than early success. She began writing bold, playful, and emotionally raw songs. She experimented with image, humor, and storytelling. Slowly, the shy church singer from Santa Barbara was transforming into a performer who understood spectacle. But the real turning point arrived when she recorded a song that many people in the industry thought was too controversial. That song would not only launch her career, it would completely change how the world saw Katy Perry, and it would start one of the most unexpected pop revolutions of the late 2000s. The turning point arrived in 2008. After years of failed record deals, shelved albums, and constant rejection, Katy Perry finally released a song that would change everything. I Kissed a Girl. The track exploded almost immediately. It climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and suddenly the girl who had once sung only in churches was one of the most talked about new artists in pop music. But the success came with controversy. Some religious groups criticized the song heavily, especially because of her strict Christian upbringing. For Katy, the moment was deeply symbolic. She had grown up in a world where certain ideas and expressions were not allowed. Now she was standing at the center of global pop culture, representing the exact opposite: freedom, color, experimentation, and individuality. But fame didn't instantly solve everything. Her second major album, Teenage Dream, 2010, turned her into a true pop phenomenon. The record produced massive hits like Firework, California Girls, and Teenage Dream. Something remarkable happened. 5 songs from the same album reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Only one other artist in history had done that before: Michael Jackson. But behind the success, life was becoming complicated. In 2010, she married British comedian Russell Brand. At first, the relationship seemed intense and romantic, but the marriage collapsed quickly. By 2012, they were divorced. At the same time, Katy was touring the world non-stop, carrying the pressure of massive fame. In later interviews, she admitted that during that period, she struggled emotionally and questioned her identity. For someone who had built a career on bright colors and playful confidence, the reality behind the scenes was far more fragile. Instead of hiding from that vulnerability, she slowly began to embrace it. Songs like Roar and later Rise reflected themes of resilience and personal strength. The same girl who once felt restricted by her childhood environment was now telling millions of people that self-belief could be louder than doubt, and that message resonated. Over the years, Katy continued evolving. Albums like Prism and Smile show different sides of her personality, sometimes playful, sometimes reflective. Her life also found new stability. She eventually formed a relationship with actor Orlando Bloom, and in 2020 they welcomed their daughter, Daisy Dove. Motherhood added a completely new perspective to someone who had spent most of her life in the spotlight. At the same time, Katy expanded beyond music. She became a judge on American Idol, mentoring young singers who were standing exactly where she once stood years earlier, hopeful, uncertain, and chasing a dream that often feels impossible. Looking back, her journey is almost paradoxical. A girl raised in one of the strictest environments imaginable eventually became one of pop music's boldest voices. A singer whose first album barely sold now has billions of streams and global recognition. And perhaps the most interesting part of her story isn't the fame. It's the contrast. The church singer who wasn't allowed to listen to pop music eventually became one of the artists who defined it. Which raises an interesting thought. If someone who grew up with so many limitations managed to reinvent herself so completely, how much of a person's future is really decided by their past? And how much of it depends on the moment they choose to become something different?